reminded of a priest friend of mine who he had studied real hard. He was really bright, and he'd prepared a homily for his first Mass, but when he got up to the microphone, he thought it wasn't working, and he said, there's something wrong with this damn thing. And also with you, was the immediate response. So this is working. This darn thing is working, right? Okay. It's a great pleasure to welcome you all. I feel like I've seen all of you, whether in jail, from Syracuse or Athens or wherever. It's a good crowd to be in here, a crowd of witnesses. I'm particularly delighted that it's American University because I was here. I was working for John F. Kennedy when he came here and made that incredible speech in 1963. And set our country on a path where we could understand that other countries look at things a little different, but we could still get along. So I'm mindful of that very much and the tragedy that prevented him from living out his term. I want to remember somebody very special who could not be with us today. Her name is Ann Wright. She has always been, well, somebody call her Colonel Ann Wright, but she doesn't prefer that. She just likes Ann. She and some of us were on the U.S. boat to Gaza. We didn't get there. Right now, she and these incredibly courageous women from all over the world are on the women's boat to Gaza. And they're in Messina, Sicily now, having completed almost half of their voyage. Barcelona was their last embarkation point. And on Tuesday, they make the rest of the trip to Gaza. Now, I don't know what's going to happen. I know very bad things could happen. And so I want to start this with just 1 minute of silence for those of you in the custom. Please hold Anne and her courageous seafarers, the women of the U.S. boat to Gaza. Hold them in the light, if you would, just for 1 minute. Thank you. I should add that she emailed me just 2 hours ago saying they're all set to go on Tuesday, and she sends her best to all of us and wishes she could be with us like so many other people do. I was thinking about John Kiriakou, our awardee, and think, well, you know, here's the first, the only truth teller ended up in prison, but then I realized, no. I went down the line of our awardees recently, and half of the last 7 have been or are in prison. Just to remind you, Frank Greville, Danish prison for exposing the fact that his prime minister lied about weapons of mass destruction. Julian Assange, 2010. Ed Snowden, not prison, exile. Chelsea Manning, 2014. And John Kiriakou, of course, we'll be talking about his 2 years in prison. These are things that need to be remembered, things that need to be kept in mind to show that there's a cost to true discipleship to the truth. Now, our first award was given in an undisclosed place to a woman who really couldn't receive the award in the open because she still worked as an attorney, a division counsel for the FBI. Her name was Colleen Rowley. I think she might be up here. Yeah, there she is, yeah. And I want to thank Colleen, and especially Elizabeth Murray, sitting to Colleen's left, for doing all the work associated with this wonderful afternoon. I thought I was going to be in, well, I was going to be in Iran, actually, and was disinvited at the last minute. So they're giving me the privilege of introducing this, but I really have, it is a privilege to introduce them, just to say how much work they've done on this, and how well it has turned out. To just look around you. If you're discouraged, just look around you. There's lots of things that happened between 2002, when Colleen was our first awardee. I won't go through them all, you're painfully aware of them. In 2015, well, we almost made it. We almost made it to celebrate the Magna Carta. We fell 3 years short when the National Defense Authorization Act empowered our president to deprive us of our civil liberties without due process. This is serious, folks. An Army type from Fort Myer or wherever could come in here and arrest a lot of us. If you don't believe it, listen to what our colleague Todd Pierce has written on Consortium News and elsewhere. He's a lawyer. He has dissected the National Defense Authorization Act, and that's what it is. No longer do we have inalienable rights. We have rights such as the Commander-in-Chief allows us. So that's a big thing. Now, I want to also mention, before I forget, that John Kiriakou, Jesselyn Radek, is Jesselyn here? I haven't seen her. Okay, and Tom Drake, Tom, raise your hand, please, are all featured in a wonderful documentary called Silenced. Everyone who has seen Silenced, raise their hand. Whoa, okay. Silenced has been silenced, okay? But you can get it on, iTunes and lots of other ways. But it is an incredible documentary about 3 stalwart people, all of them now awardees of Sam Adams Associates. Now, the next person I'm going to introduce is a little rival of mine, because he beat me in a debate at Oxford Union by 1 vote, 150 to 149. So, but I don't hold that against him, because he is far more eloquent than I am. What I'd like to do, though, is to make sure that Craig Murray gets returned to him the candlestick holder that he was so generous to give Julian Assange in 2010, when Julian Assange was picked to win the Sam Adams Award, and we rushed a citation to him, but we had no candlestick holder. So in the middle of a 300 people press conference, or at the end of it, Craig and Dan Ellsberg announced the award and gave Julian Craig's candle holder. So he's held that against me too for all these years. So I have right here, in introducing Craig, right over there, the candle holder, or a replacement for the candle holder he gave Julian. Craig, as many of you know, was ambassador, UK ambassador to Afghanistan, and he had this real weird feeling that people who were tortured couldn't give good information, and he didn't like people being tortured to begin with, and so he complained to his buddies at the Foreign Office, and the buddies at the Foreign Office, "Are you doing it?" And Craig said, "No, I'm not doing it." So, "Well, just the Americans?" "Yes, just the Americans." "Well, what's the problem? If just the Americans are doing it, are we getting information?" And Craig says, "The information isn't worth a damn." And say, "Well, you continue to do it, Ambassador Murray." And so when he received his award in New York in 2007, 2005 actually, Craig said something very touching. He said, "You know, I'd be damned. I would rather die than see someone else tortured in order to give me a little extra measure of security." That's the kind of guy Craig is. He was ostracized from all the very fancy people in London, but I think he prefers to be with us anyway. Right, Greg? Thank you very much.
Oh, a candle as well. Thank you. Well, it's another year, another Sam Adams Award, and sadly, another person who has suffered for showing integrity and honesty and good faith in government service. And I'm extremely honored to be associated with the Sam Adams Award, but it nonetheless is a tremendous indictment of our times that so many of those who receive it are people who have to pay a heavy price for showing integrity in intelligence, which is what the award is for. It fascinates me. You are very fortunate, we are all very fortunate, because you are about to hear a lineup of the most inspiring speakers I've heard anywhere in my life, and people who have fantastic life experience. People, we have, I think, 4 people who are going to talk to you have held very, very senior posts in counterintelligence in the United States government. We've got the former Chief of Staff to a Secretary of State. We've got a most amazing lineup of people. And one thing which is, it's a symptom of how dysfunctional our world is, that you have got here you've got here better wisdom, better experience, better deep knowledge of what's truly in the interests of this country in the field of security than you have across the road here, just across the road in the Department of Homeland Security. And you have people here who have held extremely senior positions in the NSA, in the CIA, in the FBI and State Department, who are standing here to give testimony to the way that the state is being abused to the detriment of the people rather than the good of the people. And yet, where is the mainstream media? This should be tremendous news. We've only ever once, I can recall, had proper mainstream coverage of a Sam Adams Award, and that was when it was given to Julian Assange, when The Guardian ran a long article which was almost entirely full of lies. The lady who wrote it attempted to make it appear she was actually at the ceremony, which she wasn't, and told a whole series of lies about the ceremony and what happened and what was said and what the audience reaction was. So we are privileged because we're going to see it, going to hear it. I was checking with the students here who are filming and recording this, and it's going to be available, it's going to be on YouTube, but we have to get it out to a wider audience, because what we're going to hear now is something which is truly remarkable and truly interesting. The fact that I was going to say we're in a university and there are no students to listen to us. That would be an ageist comment, because some of us may be students. The fact we don't look terrifically young doesn't necessarily mean we're not. But here we are in a university, and we're not reaching the audience of young people who should be fascinated to hear what goes on. I now want to introduce the first of those tremendous speakers, a man of fantastic integrity, high intellect, Thomas Drake.
It's hard to believe that 9/11 happened just over 15 years ago. It's an arrested day for me, as it is for many of us. It was my first day on the job at NSA. I quickly found out that not only did the wheels come off our form of governance, but we were in an entirely new vehicle that I did not recognize. A form of governance that I did not take an oath to support and defend. And I found myself defending the Constitution against my own government. It's important, especially for who we're going to award the Sam Adams Integrity Intelligence Award this evening, to set the frame and the context from almost 15 years ago. 5 days after 9/11, then Vice President Cheney on broadcast television said that we were going to go to the dark side. An executive, very senior at the CIA, a place I also used to work at, Cofer Black, said that the gloves were coming off. At the time those statements were made, I don't think people fully appreciated what that really meant and how dark that dark side really became, and what we did after we took the gloves off. Secret orders, presidential findings, directives were issued in the days and weeks and months after 9/11. Two of the deepest, darkest state secrets of their day, mass surveillance and torture, as state-sponsored programs, had their epigenesis in those days, weeks, and months right after 9/11. John Kiriakou was offered the opportunity to learn how to torture people, and he chose not to accept that training, would not engage in torture, and some years later found out precisely how far his own agency had gone across the globe in multiple dark sites, black sites as they're called, in terms of torturing those who we declared our enemies. And yet, those who approved the state-sponsored torture program, those who engaged in it, those who managed it, and those who actually were involved in the torture as torturers were protected and promoted. However, those exposing it, and in John Kiriakou's case, the first current or former U.S. employee of the United States government, to reveal that torture was a state-sponsored program, was severely persecuted and prosecuted. As it happened to me with mass surveillance and other government wrongdoing and exposing those darker deeds, the government decided that it was a state crime to expose its own crimes, including war crimes. And by definition, torture is a war crime. John Kiriakou paid an extraordinarily high price for having exposed torture and those who tortured. He ended up in prison for a couple of years. Thankfully, he's no longer in prison. He's actually a free man here with us this evening. What I'm about to say now, I say with an eye to history. Because John decided not to remain silent. He chose to speak up as a truth teller. He chose to expose crimes committed by his own government. And so for me, it is an honor to call him a whistleblower. It is an honor to acknowledge him as a fellow recipient of the Sam Adams Integrity and Intelligence Award, holding high the integrity of intelligence, speaking truth to power, while shining a light on the dark deeds of the deep state. Thank you. I'm sure our next speaker is going to have a few words to say as well. Larry Wilkerson, U.S. Army Colonel retired and the former Chief of Staff to the former Secretary of State, Colin Powell. Larry.
Thank you. I just say that I would go anywhere to speak against torture and unnecessary war. And in that vein, I see Gareth Porter sitting back there. I just read his article. His article contends with some documentation that the reason the peace accord, such as it was, fell apart in Syria, the most recent one, was because the Pentagon, from whence I came, 31 years, didn't like the idea that President Obama, the commander-in-chief after all, was advancing with regard to Russian-U.S. cooperation in order to stop that horrible, horrible war over there that's put so many people into diaspora in addition to the Iraqis and the Afghans and others who are already there. Now, I don't know if that's true or not. I do know that Gareth offered a lot of evidence to that fact, and it smacks with reality to this old soldier. But I do know that if it weren't for that war there and our participation therein, there wouldn't be any need for Gareth to write that article. And there wouldn't be speculation over just how much deeper we're going to get into this really bad situation in Western Asia, which incidentally we started with our invasion of Iraq in 2003. And when I see the New York Times or the Washington Post or other papers try to argue contrary to that, or the neoconservatives who are constantly arguing against it, I just have to sit in bewilderment. Because it's clear that what we unleashed when we performed our duty in Iraq, whatever that duty was hell in Western Asia. And it's not at all clear that hell is going to subside anytime soon. A Jordanian said to me recently, putting his finger in my chest in Syracuse, Sicily, where we were visiting for a conference together, do you know there's an Iraqi family in every single Jordanian home? Every single one, Larry. Go back and tell your former boss that. I know who you work for. Oh, and by the way, there are now Syrians knocking on those doors to get into those homes. Do you know how destabilizing that is for Jordan, small country in that region? How destabilizing it's becoming for southern Lebanon and so forth? And we started all this. We started all of this. So war and torture are two things that I'll speak out against. I have been in 50 states, including Hawaii and Alaska, in the last 7 years. And I will tell you that the polls are right. A good 53 to 55% of the American people who are like you, support torture, particularly if you tell them it's in extremis. And then you explain to them that that is the portion of the UN Convention, and indeed of U.S. domestic law, with a few reservations on that convention, that is most particular, that we pressed the hardest to get when we were advocating for that treaty. That is to say, no national emergency whatsoever will ever, under the law, condone torture, period. That's what it says. And yet we have Hollywood directors and others, they come from New York too and elsewhere, who put on shows like 24 with Jack Bauer and other shows with subliminal and not so subliminal messages that torture works and that torture is what you should do if you're a red-blooded American. And that's why you have these majorities all across the country who still believe, and I spend half my time trying to disabuse them of it, based on the two, I think, most effective arguments. The first, that it doesn't work, and that the reason people all around the world who do torture is to get confessions. And they don't give a damn about whether it's the truth or not. They just want to hang somebody or put him in jail. And the other one is, of course, the moral issue. And John McCain, God bless his heart, before he turned into what he is today, who incidentally in January 2005 helped Powell and others of us get the armed forces out of the business of torture. John McCain said it's not about them, it's about us. And he's absolutely right. It's a moral and ethical issue of the very first order. If you do it, you're wrong, period. I don't know any religion in the world that wouldn't pronounce it thusly. So I stand with Tom and others up here applauding John Kiriakou for what he did, and people like Glenn Carl, who wrote the book Interrogator, and who essentially, with a little redaction, tells you what the CIA was doing. And the previous words about people being rewarded and promoted and moved up are enough to turn your stomach. I happen to know that the two analysts who gave Colin Powell most of the information he presented at the United Nations on February the 5th, 2003 about weapons of mass destruction in the hands of Saddam Hussein were promoted afterwards. Now, is that any way to run an institution, an organization? There's no accountability. There's no culpability. There's just immunity or reward. Now, there were some people punished in the torture business, but they were mud soldiers. They were people at the bottom of the chain. For Abu Ghraib in Iraq, we got a brigadier general whom, from what I can tell from the records in the archives, had absolutely nothing to do with what was going on at Abu Ghraib and was trying to stop it. So where we do punish, it's either ridiculous or it's so low it doesn't achieve any accountability at the level where it should. So again, thank you for coming out. I hope you will go anywhere and talk about and to the subjects of unnecessary war. And by that I mean if the enemy's on the shore with a saber in his hand, a bayonet or a bomb, I'm ready to fight. But elsewhere, no. And torture, speak out against it. Anywhere you can, everywhere you can. I love preaching to the choir. But I also like talking to those who come across the balustrade, as it were, and try to hit me. And that happened to me in Norfolk, Virginia, just a couple of days ago. So they're out there. I don't need to tell you that. All you have to do is look at the present political campaign, and you know they're out there. We are in danger of losing our republic. We have already lost the constitutional liberal republic that the founders aimed at. We need to return to that constitutional liberal republic. What we have right now is an illiberal non-constitutional republic, which means it is run by the rule of law, but the rule of law serves a small percentage of the people and not the majority. That has to change, and the only way it's going to change is you and millions others like you. Now I'd like to introduce, another of the intelligence professionals associated with this group, and a man, I'll just sum him up this way. My daughter, who was a military officer for about 8 years, and then a Secret Service agent for about 8 years until she met her husband in the Secret Service, said, I listened to two people in the intelligence world, Pat Lang and Larry Johnson. Well, here's Larry Johnson.
Several years ago, I was fortunate to play, there's a Bobby Mitchell Hall of Fame Golf Classic. Bobby Mitchell, for those of you who are not into sports, he was a Hall of Famer for the Washington Redskins. And his Hall of Fame Classic was out at Lansdowne. He would bring in Joe Namath, Wilt Chamberlain, all of these guys, men who are in the Hall of Fame in baseball, basketball, and football. And I was playing in a group with a fellow named Night Train Lane who played in the 50s. And there are several of you in this room who look to me old enough who might remember who Night Train Lane was. So when I'm playing with him, he's a grossly obese man, well into his 70s, could barely get out of the golf cart, but they would allow the crowd to come in. And as the crowd came in, they would get autographs from people. So we were walking up to the 10th tee, and I remember this small boy pointing at me and going, Mommy, who's that? And she looked and goes, he's a nobody. So I'm here today as a nobody. I'm not one of the people who got to go to the meetings with the principals. I'm the one who would write the talking points for the people who would go to the meeting, who would then pretend that they knew what they were talking about. And that was what I discovered about the nature of intelligence. I do have a connection to Sam Adams, but it's indirect. And it conjures up a football name, George Allen. But this George Allen was not the football coach of the Washington Redskins. George Allen was the boss of Sam Adams. And 30 years ago and 1 month ago, I was sitting in the new analyst course at the Central Intelligence Agency. I just completed my first year as a career trainee. I was in the class with Valerie Plame. And all of us new analysts were there with Sam Adams' boss. And he told a really important story to us. And I give the CIA credit that they brought in George Allen to train new analysts, because his message to us was very simple. He said he looked back now with regret on that time when they were fighting the battle against the Pentagon, when they had intelligence about what was actually going on the ground in Vietnam, and yet their efforts to tell the truth were opposed by not just the Pentagon, but by the White House. And George told stories. He said he was getting phone calls from McGeorge Bundy, the National Security Advisor, and he even got a phone call from President Johnson. And the message to him was, why can't you be a team player? And, this was not a sports competition where somebody would win and lose. This was involving life and death decisions. And George said something very important. He said, and he was filled with regret, because unlike Sam Adams, Sam came from a wealthy family. Sam had money, and this does not diminish at all what Sam did. But if you've got a couple of $1 million in the bank account, it's a lot easier to stand up and tell Uncle Sam to go pound sand, which is what Sam had no problem doing. But as George Allen explained, he said, I had 2 kids in high school, and I had to figure out how I was going to pay for their college. And so he said, I didn't make the stand that I should have. And he says, I'm here to tell you I live with that as a regret today. And if you are confronted with that situation, I encourage you to stand up. Well, I didn't quite realize at the time how important what he was saying was, but it became quite apparent within 6 months, because I was the Honduran analyst in the Central American branch in 1986. Remember, Eugene Hassenfuss was then shot down inside Nicaragua. I later went on to become the senior regional analyst in Central America during the Contra War. And I recall very clearly one of the times we were in a meeting with the National Intelligence Officer, Bob Vickers, and I used the term Contras. And he said, "Stop. You can't use that term." I said, "What, Contra?" He goes, "Yes. You can only call them the democratic resistance." And this is why I didn't last long at CIA. I said, "But President Reagan calls them the Contras." And he wasn't at all amused by that. And that's where I began to get the first insight into the horror sort of that has enveloped John Kiriakou. Because if you're going to take college students and give them 3 pieces of literature or 3 authors to look at in order to understand not only the world of national security but the world of intelligence, start them off with Lewis Carroll. Next, Franz Kafka. And top it off with Kurt Vonnegut. Only then do you begin to understand this theme that have been touched upon both by Larry and by Tom and others, which is, if you do the right thing, you'll get punished. If you do the wrong thing, you'll get rewarded. If you are looking for accountability, don't look in Washington. I will leave you with one final example. Again, it's a personal story, but it illustrates the courage, I think, not my courage on my part, but what we see that in what John did on such a weighty issue. At the end of my first year as an analyst, the division director for Africa, Latin America, a fellow named John Allen, called all the new analysts in. And he said, "I understand there's morale problems." Now, look, I admit, I was at that point 31. I should have been smarter, okay? I was old enough, I should have known better, but I didn't. And John said, "I'd like to know what the problem is." Well, I really thought he wanted to know. And so I said, "Well, John, it's real simple." I said, if you take a look at the fellow who was running the Near East South Asia division, he got a $25,000 cash award last year for the quality of the analysis. He took part of that money, he threw a party for the analysts to say thank you, because he recognized that he got the award because of the work of the people who worked for him. I said, "Whereas your predecessor, a guy who was named Rick Stakem, and we called him Rapem Stakem," it was not meant as an endearing term. I said, "He got a $25,000 cash award, and he bought himself a Lexus." At that point, the room went dead silent. John turned a brilliant shade of red, threw everybody else out of the room, and proceeded to read me the riot act up one side and down the other. And at that point, I realized I don't have a long term left at CIA. Now, I want to say that John Kiriakou was similarly naive, similarly trusting. He actually thought, he had the audacity to believe that this was not a rigged system, that those who told the truth would get rewarded, that those who stood up in the face of danger would be praised. But instead, what he discovered is he would be abandoned and sent to prison, and that those who actually broke the law, those who actually engaged in torture, prospered and went free. So John, we're here to honor you today, and despite not having read enough Kafka, Lewis Carroll, and Vonnegut before you got to the CIA, you still have time left, brother.
Our next speaker is Philip Giraldi, also from the CIA.
First of all, I would like to congratulate John for this award, but I would also like to commend him for what the reward represents, which is the willingness to take an essentially moral position, knowing full well that a powerful government agency would be angered and watching his every move as a result. I have known many government officials who saw evil but preferred to remain silent as the path of least resistance, and this particular true of CIA's clubby culture in the Deputy Directorate of Operations, where John and I both served. If the DO had a motto, I'm not sure what it would have been in Latin, but it would have been in English, "We'll do whatever you want and we won't tell anyone." It was not for the faint-hearted. I don't particularly want to put words into John's mouth, nor am I seeking to reconstruct his own experience, but I would like to speak a little bit about the moral ambiguity surrounding government work in the realm of national security. John and I are of different generations in CIA, but we shared the experience of working for an agency ostensibly dedicated to protecting the nation from external threats. And there were external threats back in those days. Terrorism was on and off again, but there was the formidable Soviet Union. We both come from the second-generation European immigrant stock in America's northeastern melting pot, and I'm sure we both had fathers, uncles, and cousins who fought in World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. Coming from that background, as a self-defined patriotic American, working for CIA was the right thing to do. So you go overseas, even if you are aware and understand the fact that you are essentially working for an illegal organization, one that steals things, misrepresents the truth, and even on occasion kills without any due process. And you find that you are working for people who could care less about the unpleasant things because they are building careers. So disillusionment settles in very, very quickly. But that's all okay because it is done to help our country, and we are, after all, the good guys. You have a dream job, great benefits, and you shut out the bad experiences. But that doesn't mean that you forget about them, and the revulsion for some of what goes on builds up. My own breaking point came when 19 local CIA agents in an Asian country, 5 of whom I had recruited, were rounded up, tortured, and executed for spying because someone in Washington made a mistake. No one was ever punished. No one is ever punished except whistleblowers. We're the good guys. After 9/11, the groupthink became even worse. Not only were we the good guys, but someone had attacked us. And that's when the rule book got thrown out the window. 2 of my CIA classmates were the architects of the torture and rendition programs, while the Patriot Act stripped away our liberties here at home. And then one morning you wake up and you realize we're not the good guys anymore. We have become the bad guys. And the rest of the world has pretty much figured out that that's exactly who we are. Defending America has become an excuse for an endless cycle of revenge inflicted mostly on helpless civilians who had no more to do with 9/11 than the late lamented Saddam Hussein. Some CIA people never figure out what is going on, and when you meet them, they frequently mention that what we do doesn't matter because we are still the good guys. I hear that sort of thing frequently in relationship to our fractured relationship, our deliberately fractured relationship with Russia, and it saddens me. And even after you have figured things out, the final step is the tough one. You have to decide that something is wrong and that you have to do something, make an effort to do something about it, to correct it. That is what John has done, telling the truth about CIA interrogations and calling them what they were, torture. He is one of the few, and he paid the price for it. I personally thank you, John, for your integrity and your courage. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Murray. I served as Deputy National Intelligence Officer for the Near East in the National Intelligence Council before I retired after 27 years in the Central Intelligence Agency. I was a political analyst specializing in Middle Eastern affairs and actually worked closely at one point in my career with John's wife, Heather, who was a leadership analyst on Saudi Arabia. Although I didn't know her extremely well, it really struck my heart when I found out that CIA let her go from her job, not because of anything that she did, but because of what was happening with her husband, John, and after he was sentenced. So that was really awful, because just like most people who join the CIA with sort of idealism, that's what I did back in 1983 as an open source officer. I was dealing mainly with translations of foreign news and providing leader speeches and analyses of newspaper editorials to policymakers. So I felt I was making a really substantive contribution to our government's understanding of what our foreign, oops, sorry, Craig, what foreign leaders were doing. And, you know, like John and like others in the CIA, you know, one of the joys of our work was finding out the truth, getting it right, and then writing about it, telling what really happened. And of course, after a while you realize that that's okay as long as you're not telling what really happened to the American public, as long as it stays on the inside. And the problem is that the CIA tries to hire people of integrity, but then gradually they tell you, okay, but you can't tell anyone about it. And as we're all public servants in the government, and we all have an obligation to tell the truth to the American people. And most of us who started in government realize that. So we're duty bound to do this, and you know, as all of you know, under the Obama administration, anyone who tried to do this came under extreme punitive measures. We have John Kiriakou, look at Edward Snowden, look where Bradley Chelsea Manning is, and Julian Assange, of course, is in the Ecuadorian embassy because he knows that he will be renditioned immediately to the United States if he is extradited, if he leaves the embassy and is extradited to Sweden. So this is the United States that we live in now. And I'm going to try to keep this brief because I think we're running low on time. But you know, the point I want to make is that John and his wife Heather were extremely highly regarded in the CIA. Even though I didn't know John personally, I knew Heather well enough, and I knew of the two of them. They were basically royalty, and they were really highly respected for the quality of their work. So, you know, this is what happens to even the creme de la creme of people in whatever agency. If you cross that line and talk outside, you know, step outside the lines. Now, of course, most of you probably know that it wasn't long after John went to prison that President Obama said on national television, well, we tortured some folks. And that's exactly what John said, but that was, you know, the little people are not allowed to talk, okay? And that's the message that we all get. You keep your mouth shut, you have a good job, you have a good career, but don't step outside those lines. So anyone who tries to exercise their First Amendment rights to tell the truth to the public will be denied that right and will face severe consequences. So that's why we're here to honor John, because there's a quote from Daniel Ellsberg that I want to leave you with. As the famous Pentagon Papers whistleblower Daniel Ellsberg said, and he's a great supporter of whistleblowing, it is worth a person's life. It is worth the prospect of assassination or life in prison or life in exile. It is worth that to try to restore our liberties and make this a democratic country. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, according to the program I have in front of me, I am now going to speak for 15 minutes, which is 10 minutes longer than John Kiriakou gets on this program. You'll be Glad to hear that that's not going to happen. In fact, according to the timetable, I should already have finished 5 minutes ago. So I'm just going to give you a very, very few brief remarks. First, I'd like to thank those of you who helped me get here, because the American government seemed not at all keen on allowing me into the country, and 16,000 of you signed a petition, and people called and lobbied and phoned, and I'm here. In fact, for those of us, sometimes we get, dispirited and discontented and feel that we as people never have any power at all. Well, I can tell you, I've never been whisked through an airport in such a VIP fashion as I got when I arrived here. So, sometimes we can do it. I do hope that there is actually a candlestick to give John, and I don't have to give mine away again. I was in bed at 2:30 in the morning, and the phone went, woke me up, and it said, "Hello, this is Dan Ellsberg." And I said, "Oh God, Howard, you're drunk again. Bugger off," and hung up. So it was my brother-in-law, but no, it was Dan Ellsberg who phoned me up again. And he said that at 7 o'clock, I had to be at a hotel in London, which was about 60 miles from where I lived at the time. And he and I had to give the candlestick to Julian Assange. And I said, "Have you got a candlestick?" And he said, "No." So I then had to pick up my one and give it to Julian, which I was very happy to do, and it all worked. Like many of us, I've been privileged to become quite a good friend of Julian since, and spend some time with him, which I suspect may be why they weren't too keen on letting me into the country. I think it's fair to say that I am actually no danger or threat to the United States government. I think it's also true to say I'm sorry about that. But Julian is one of many people who has suffered not just deprivation of liberty, but an assault on his personal integrity as a result of being involved in truth-telling. I suffered much the same thing. It's happened to many of us. Brigadier Janice Karpinski, lady who was, I believe I'm right in saying she was the most senior female in the American Armed Forces. And when she came, she was scapegoated for the Abu Ghraib torture. And it seemed to me that they basically found the most senior woman and scapegoated her. And when she then blew the whistle and said that she had, for example, personally seen a memo signed by Donald Rumsfeld himself advocating torture techniques to be used, and then the day after she said that, she was caught shoplifting. Who believes this stuff? Who really does believe this stuff? I was charged with 18 different allegations, which raised from blackmailing visa applicants in exchange for sex to driving a Range Rover down an internal stairway. That last one I thought was wonderful. I wish I'd done it. But the truth is, I've actually never driven a vehicle in my life. I can't drive. Ever since I've been 16, I've never once been sober enough. So I've never actually driven a vehicle. But nonetheless, this amazing charge sheet came out. But I mean, joking aside, they didn't ever intend, and I was eventually cleared of all charges after a 4-month investigation, but that wasn't the point. The point was, the day the charges were laid, the government leaked them to the tabloid newspapers. And this is the kind of thing you face as whistleblowers. It's not just that you can lose your career. They attempt to devastate your social standing and to alienate you from society and make you somebody on the outside. And it's also true that we face a situation where it's so hard to get away from the politics which have enforced neoconservatism on both the United States and the United Kingdom as the default foreign policy position. In the United Kingdom, in some ways, I think it's even worse than here. I believe I'm right in saying that there is nobody in charge of any major UK government institution who was opposed to the Iraq War, not even opposed internally to the Iraq War. Well, the Labour Party is not a government institution, but I'm just coming on to to Jeremy Corbyn, because Jeremy, who I've had the great privilege to speak with on many occasions at Stop the War events, has been suffering the most intense campaign of media vilification you can possibly imagine. He's been called everything from die-hard communist, supporter of terrorism, anti-Semitic. There's no epithet you can think of that the media hasn't been throwing at him, and not just marginally. I mean, on the front page, day after day after day after day. And the fact that he's actually, come through this and campaigned and is still the leader of the opposition is absolutely astonishing. And it's part of what we are now seeing, and we're seeing everywhere. You're seeing it definitely here in the States as well, which is a radical uprising of ordinary people against what they've been fed. And it is predicated on an extraordinary number of people whose eyes have been opened to the fact that what the media serves you day in, day out is not the truth. And we have to work on that. We have to work with that, because we are it, people like us, because this is based on people becoming, again, the means of communication of what's really happening in the world, as opposed to a capital-intensive media becoming the means of communication. And it's a combination of two things. It's a combination of old-fashioned meetings and political activism, and I think that the Bernie Sanders campaign here in the States was something of the same kind of dynamic, combined with aggressive use of new media and getting the truth out there. And I urge all of you, when you take new heart, when you get away from here, remember that, yes, it's awful. Yes, the good guys are punished. Yes, the bad guys control the power. But the people are still out there. And the people are beginning to understand, beginning to see through. And that's something we can all be part of. Thank you. We now have Elizabeth Murray and Colleen Rowley are going to read the, oh, he's got a beautiful candlestick. He's going to read the citation, John Kiriakou.
All right. Piano music, I guess. Okay. Just after. So, we're going to start by reading the citation for John, and then we're going to present the corner bright.
You got to get closer.
So, okay. Know all ye by these presents that John Kiriakou is hereby honored with a traditional Sam Adams corner brightener candlestick holder in symbolic recognition of Mr. Kiriakou's courage in shining light into dark places.
John Kiriakou found himself atop the CIA's wanted list when he confirmed publicly that the CIA had been carrying out a White House-approved torture program, which turned out to be using techniques virtually identical to those in the Gestapo handbook.
Alarm bells at the CIA. Put this guy in prison before there are additional disclosures, and seduce Hollywood into seducing Americans into seeing with their own eyes that torture works, and make sure the media ignores others with impeccable credentials, like Army Intelligence Chief General John Kimmons, who said on September the 6th, 2006, quote, "No good intelligence is going to come from abusive practices. The empirical evidence of the last 5 years, hard years, tells us that," end quote.
General Kimmons had an institution at his back, not nipping at his heels. Enter the U.S. Senate, another institution that faced into its constitutional responsibility. While John sat in prison, Senate Intelligence Committee investigators pored through original CIA cables and concluded unambiguously that Kimmons and Kiriakou were right, and the CIA and Hollywood were dead wrong.
Briefed on those findings, President Obama, in August of 2014, trivialized torture with the dismissive comment, "We tortured some folks." Then he joined the CIA in a concerted attempt to squelch the Senate report. But Senator Dianne Feinstein thwarted that joint campaign and in December of 2014 published an executive summary, redacted yet still gruesome beyond imagination.
John Kiriakou's integrity and the reality that he sat in prison while the torturers were covering up their actions and their lies made Senator Feinstein's intrepid investigators even more determined to make sure Americans got to know the truth about what was done in their name. As for John, it is a sure thing that he will continue to give no quarter in his passion for spreading truth around, no matter the systemic hurdles he may still have to surmount.
Presented on this 25th day of September 2016 in Washington, D.C., by the admirers of the example set by the late CIA analyst Sam Adams.
Thank you so much. I'm truly honored and humbled to be here, not just because of this award, but because of the giants that are sitting on this stage. There was a long period of time between when I learned of the torture program and when I actually opened my mouth. It was something like 5.5 years. I kept silent, but I watched all of these people, and I thought, what courage they have. Why can't I be like that? I didn't have the guts for 5.5 years. So to be up here with all of you, wow, it's incredible to me. Thank you so much for everything. I sometimes tell reporters that the government has turned me into a dissident, and I only say that half jokingly. I don't really feel like a dissident. I do feel, though, that the government demonizes people who disagree with the official line, and you can see that right here on this stage. This has become especially bad since the September 11th attacks and since the passage of the ill-conceived and inappropriately named Patriot Act. And that's where I find myself today. I don't feel like I've changed over the years at all. I feel like the government has changed. When I was on rotation to the State Department in the early 1990s, I was the human rights officer at the American Embassy in Manama, Bahrain, a very small country in the Arabian Gulf. The Bahraini government at the time was trying to put down a popular uprising by using force, and they weren't really succeeding. They were essentially doing what they're doing today, shooting people, arresting people, holding people without charge. It was my job at the time to document how the Bahraini government was using force against its demonstrators, against unarmed civilians. They were perpetrating extrajudicial killings of protesters, and they were using torture and solitary confinement against people who had never been even accused formally of a crime. So I documented all of this in my human rights report, which was mandated by Congress and was supposed to be used to pressure the Bahraini government to begin respecting the human rights of its citizens. I know, it's laughable. But much of what the Bahraini government did to its own people in the 1990s was later done by the American government to its own people. Just a couple of years later, we call this the so-called war on terror. We tortured prisoners. We murdered people, including at least 3 American citizens who had never been accused of a crime, who had never had the opportunity to face their accusers in a court of law. We've used drones to kill people without the benefit of trial. We held people incommunicado in secret prisons around the world, and we worked hard to ensure that our prisoners either had no access to an attorney, or if they did have an attorney, never saw the inside of a courtroom. That is not the American way. Again, I didn't change, the government changed. This all started with that so-called Patriot Act. The Patriot Act has legalized government actions against American citizens that even 20 years ago would have been absolutely unthinkable, intolerable even. For example, when I first entered government, literally on my first day at the CIA, we were briefed on NSA. And we were told that if NSA had intercepted the communications of an American citizen or even a U.S. person, that's anybody in the United States legally with a green card, heads would roll. And this was even if the intercept had been accidental. Congress would have to be informed. An investigation was launched. And the intercept was finally purged from the system. But today, NSA has an enormous facility in Utah, big enough to save copies of every email and every phone conversation made by every American for the next 500 years. I don't know about you, but I don't want the government knowing what's in my private communications and trampling my civil liberties. We Americans have a constitutional right to freedom of speech. The Supreme Court has interpreted the Constitution to also give us a right to privacy. The issue isn't what's being said in those private communications. The issue is that it's none of the government's business what's being said in those communications. People frequently ask me why they should care if the government is reading their emails or listening to their phone calls. They say, I have nothing to hide, right? So why should I worry about it? That question sends chills up my spine. Not the least reason being because, at least I've learned this from my friend Tom Drake, because that question was first uttered publicly by Joseph Goebbels. That's who we're taking our lead from now. First, anybody who has ever spent any time working in the intelligence community will tell you that even if you have nothing to hide, and we all have something to hide, but even if you think you have nothing to hide, metadata, just the raw information about whom you're calling or what websites you're visiting, can be incredibly revealing. Analysts don't need the actual content of the emails or the phone calls to know what you're up to. How about these questions? Are you calling an abortion provider? Are you calling a psychiatrist, a divorce attorney? Are you calling a secret girlfriend or boyfriend? A substance abuse counselor? What kind of porn do you like to watch? What kind of chat rooms do you go to? What websites do you visit? What organizations do you belong to? Anybody can be made to look like a suspect. Anybody. Anybody's life can be twisted to make you look like a threat or a potential threat. But the truth doesn't matter here because the government doesn't care what the truth is. Everybody is a suspect, and that means that the government needs even more money to spy in more sophisticated ways on more people, more American citizens. The problem doesn't end with data collection. Daniel Ellsberg, and all of you know Daniel Ellsberg. Listen, I was 6 years old the first time I ever heard the name Daniel Ellsberg, and I remember it. I remember asking my mother, who was this person they were talking about? And my mother said, Daniel Ellsberg is an American hero. And he has been a hero in my house since 1970. Daniel Ellsberg, who, of course, yeah. Daniel Ellsberg once told me that every dirty trick that the Nixon White House perpetrated against him to try to convict him of espionage for leaking the truth about the Vietnam War is now legal under the Patriot Act. With a national security letter, and not even with a warrant, with a national security letter, the FBI can get your medical records, your call data, notes from treatment from a psychiatrist, your phone records, books that you buy or books that you borrow from the library. They can build a case against you whether you've done anything or not. Harvey Silverglate, who is a professor of law at Harvard University, posits in his book, 3 Felonies a Day, that in the United States we are so over-criminalized and so over-regulated that the average American on the average day going about his or her normal business commits 3 felonies. With the bottom line being, if they want to get you, they're going to get you. The Founding Fathers saw this coming. James Madison, who was the author of the Constitution's Bill of Rights, argued that the First Amendment must protect the minority from the majority, ensuring that even in the face of overwhelming pressure, the minority would still have a constitutionally guaranteed right to freedom of speech, press, religion, assembly, and to petition elected officials. The Bill of Rights is the only thing standing between us and fascism. So am I a dissident? I don't know. I don't care. It's not important. But the truth is I've become very passionate about our defense of our constitutional rights. I have a constitutionally guaranteed and mandated freedom of speech, and I will continue to exercise it. It has already meant a stint in prison, but their prison didn't frighten me. I don't care. The more of us who are willing to tough it out in prison, the less powerful the government is in trying to take away our rights. The more of us... The more of us who are willing to write, speak, teach, blog, and if we have standing, to file suits against the bastards, the more we will be successful against government overreach, and the better our chances of preserving our freedoms. It is worth it, no matter the costs. 2 years ago, I was in a cage in Loretto, Pennsylvania. That cage is a long way from this podium. For that, I have these wonderful people and all of you to thank. So thank you very, very much.
Well, those of you who may have been a little bit depressed coming into this place, I would suggest something. Everyone stand up silently, please, and look around you. There are enough of us, as Cesar Chavez used to say. The only thing we need to do is not speech or write, we need to act, and I understand that a lot of you are motivated to act. If you look, come on, look around you, look at the people behind you. There are enough of us, and look at the caliber of people here, not just on the stage, but here. You give us courage and affirmation. Now, I want to thank Andy Shalal from Busboys and Poets for chipping in for our reception, which is going to be following now. But I want to especially thank Elizabeth Murray, who from Bellingham, Washington, arranged all this, okay? With the considerable help of Colleen Riley, who knew the ropes on these kinds of things, and I just want to say it's just incredible. Not only you guys out there, but look at these guys up here: Tom, Larry, and who's that? Phil. Yeah, I mean these are real deal guys, right? Stand-up guys, right? And last but not least, my good friend Craig Murray. Those who want to talk to Craig during the refreshments, ask him about the horrid pictures that the mothers of Uzbek people being tortured threw over his transom. How he sent them to the medical examiner in Scotland and found out that they had been boiled. Boiled, yeah. Now, that's the kind of thing that none of us should abide, and that's why Craig is no longer in Her Majesty's service. He's in service, the same service we're all in, the service for humanity, the service against torture, the same service that John Kiriakou is in. So thank you again for coming, but I want to give the last word to Ambassador Murray because I admire him so much, because he came from so far, and because he proved that a little bit of citizen action really works. I think he explained that to you. Craig, would you finish us off?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ray. Yeah, no, it's true that the torture to which I was able to bear witness, to be evidence at least, in Uzbekistan did include people being boiled alive. It included the most appalling types of torture you can possibly imagine. And it's also true that the CIA was sending people there in order to be tortured. For me, one of the things which I struggle to come to terms with is the fact, and I'm sure this is something which all of my colleagues here have to come to terms with as well, that the people you know who are good people go along with it for the sake of their career. Maybe they convince themselves they're being patriotic, one way or another, but mostly to keep bread on the table and keep supporting their family. But on the other hand, for me, it's much more important to have a clean conscience, to be able to sleep at night and to be working for a decent society for everybody. And that's what I'm so proud of all the people here, because they've all taken that decision. And finally, people say to me, I nearly always turn up at these things, and I don't care how far I have to come. It's well worth it to me to fly thousands of miles to be here with you. And it's not just because I want to share experiences with you. It's also partly selfish, because it recharges my batteries, because I hope for all of us, the experience of being with so many good and inspiring people, and I mean you in the audience as well as the people on the stage, helps keep us going, keep fighting the good fight, and I'm quite sure we'll all be at it, and I'm quite sure I'll see many of you at the ceremony when we find our next worthy recipient of the Sam Adams Prize. Thank you very much indeed.